There was no writing, no cities, and yet someone had already begun. Small clay figures emerging from the earth, elongated heads, almond-shaped eyes, faces resembling reptiles. Was this merely strange art, or a deliberate code left behind by someone long forgotten? Today we're tracing the marks of a great leap that took place even before the Sumerians. During the Ubaid period, the rise of agriculture and irrigation systems, the first signs of storage architecture, and the precursors of temples. At the same time, we'll examine the elongated-headed, almond-eyed, reptilian-style clay figurines discovered in sites like Eridu, al-Ubaid, and Bahra in Kuwait. Through these clues, we're chasing three of the most unsettling questions in all of ancient history. Who taught the people of that era such organized transformation? How did it happen so quickly? And within this very context, who or what do those elongated-headed Ubaid figurines truly represent? If you're ready, let's dive deep into this mystery. To uncover the truths hidden in the dark, welcome to the discovery of mystery. The Sumerians hadn't even discovered writing yet. We're deep in the timeline, so far back that humanity is only just beginning to stand upright. The first doors of civilization barely creaking open. Across the harsh plains of Mesopotamia, the first sparks of culture were flickering to life. But behind those sparks lay a mystery that still challenges the limits of our imagination. A secret that slept beneath the soil for thousands of years, silent, dark, and unseen, until the early 20th century. When Leonard Woolley and his team began their excavations, it was as if the earth could no longer keep its secret buried. And what do you think emerged? Small clay figures, sculptures that, at first glance, resembled neither humans nor any known animal. They were made of baked clay, long cone-shaped heads, almond-shaped eyes, thin lips, and straight yet pronounced noses. They looked as if they had stepped right out of a science fiction scene. But there was something even more unsettling. They looked familiar. Staring at them, you couldn't help but think, that's an alien silhouette. When you consider their age, the mystery deepens. These figurines date back nearly 7,000 years, to a time even older than the Sumerians, the era of the Ubaid culture. And they weren't confined to Mesopotamia alone. Similar examples were found at Bahra, one in Kuwait. In other words, this wasn't an isolated phenomenon restricted to a single village or valley. It appears to be part of a culture that spread across a vast region in a remarkably short time. Saying they were deliberately distributed might be too bold, but it's clear that a shared aesthetic and set of ideas circulated widely across an entire basin. So who did these figurines represent? History books won't give you a clear answer. Some archaeologists refer to them as lizard-headed or serpent-like figures, a harmless label describing their surface appearance. Yet others believe the real truth lies behind the names, hidden in a darker place. So listen carefully. This isn't just another archaeology story. This might be the opening of a door that history has tried very hard to keep shut. If you want to see what lies beyond that door, focus now and keep your curiosity alive, because what comes next unfolds like a silent pact between the listener and history itself. Let's travel back, long before the grand cities of the Sumerians, to the age of the Ubaid. Historical sources call it a village culture, but that term risks underestimating what truly happened there. The Ubaid period marked one of humanity's most critical leaps forward. These were not mere hunter-gatherers struggling to survive. They changed the rules of the game. They tamed the land, built irrigation channels, and increased productivity. Surplus crops were stored. Stored goods required management. Management gave birth to hierarchy. Perhaps for the first time in history, a ruling class emerged, permanent, structured, and bound to the land. Settlements like Eridu and Tel al-Ubaid were not simple clusters of huts. With their proto-temples, communal areas, and signs of social organization, they were precursors to true cities. And this culture didn't flourish in isolation. It spread its painted pottery, belief forms, and daily practices across the Persian Gulf region, reaching as far as Bahra in Kuwait. Architectural evidence suggests a striking sense of order and planning for its time. Some buildings display tripartite layouts. The use of natural asphalt is also known in the region. It might have been applied for waterproofing or as flooring material. Claiming they built asphalt roads would be an exaggeration, yet the idea that they used surface preparation and bitumen techniques remains plausible. All this breaks the cliché of a small group playing with mud. But here's the question. Did these developments occur entirely on their own, or did someone teach them? Some say there were teachers. Who were they? Where did they come from? Why did they accelerate progress that would normally take centuries within a single era? There's no definitive answer. Some researchers speak of internal dynamics and environmental adaptation, while esoteric interpretations hint at something darker behind the scenes. A model guided by an unknown mind. What we know is that the Ubaid culture lasted several millennia, roughly between 6,500 and 3,800 BCE. That suggests it wasn't just a temporary style. It was a way of thinking, a worldview taking root. Esoteric readings claim the lizard-headed figurines represent not only gods, but the architects of this order. It's not a conclusion mainstream archaeology accepts, but the discussion itself keeps the questions alive. Now let's turn to one of the most striking details. The elongated conical heads of the figurines. Could they be masks? Science points to a more earthly explanation: intentional cranial deformation. While an infant's skull is still soft, tight bandages or wooden boards are used to apply constant pressure, shaping the head over time. The bone adapts, hardening into that elongated form in adulthood. Skeletal remains from the region clearly show signs of this deliberate practice. But why? Why would a family subject their child to such a painful and irreversible transformation? Mainstream explanations suggest it was a marker of identity and status. The shape of the head could serve as a bodily seal of belonging to a lineage, a group, or a faith. Some call it a biological passport. The esoteric perspective, however, raises a darker possibility. Could this have been a visible sign of separation from ordinary humans? An attempt to resemble the divine? Was cranial elongation a conscious imitation of others, those beings portrayed in the figurines? Conspiracy theorists take it a step further. They claim the reptilian facial features of the figurines represented a higher being that certain elites sought to emulate. This imitation, they say, wasn't just aesthetic, it was a symbolic call to share in power and knowledge. Thus, the long-headed elites became not merely rulers, but guardians of forbidden wisdom and secret rituals. Keepers of temples, granaries, and symbolic keys, a class deemed legitimate by birth. But one question still hangs in the air. Were these people truly the natural leaders of their society, or were they chosen envoys of unseen teachers? A striking feature of the Ubaid figurines is that many are female-themed. Not the majority, but a significant number emphasize the maternal body, depicting scenes of breastfeeding or holding infants. Such imagery is generally associated with fertility and the continuity of life. Archaeological literature often interprets these findings through the lens of a mother-goddess cult. Yet something unusual stands out. The faces of these mothers are not human. They carry a reptilian aesthetic. Almond-shaped eyes, elongated skulls, smooth, mask-like expressions. In other words, we are looking at a mother nursing her baby, yet with the head of a lizard. That alone is enough to overturn the equation. According to esoteric interpretations, the serpent motif represents more than chaos. It symbolizes the dual power of the Tigris and Euphrates, both life-giving and destructive, the shadowy wisdom of the underworld, and the sharp boundary of transformation. Within this view, the reptilian mother is not merely an emblem of fertility, but a symbol of a semi-divine force controlling earth, water, in the lineage of humankind. And so another question arises. What if these figurines were not objects of worship at all, but silent representations of an actual hybrid race? Conspiracy theorists voice this possibility openly. They point to the fact that even the infants in some figurines share the same reptilian features, suggesting an emphasis on heredity, that genetic traits were being intentionally passed on. Mainstream science does not accept this as proven fact, yet the debate itself remains sharp as a blade, forcing us to think deeper. The question, "What does this mean?" pulls the viewer into the depths of the narrative. There is no answer, at least not yet, but the question keeps the door ajar. Let's take a closer look at their practices. Ubaid burial customs mark a clear departure from earlier eras. The dead were buried whole, often with beads, necklaces, and vessels filled with food. Death appears not as a simple end, but as a conscious passage. In later phases of the period, reptilian figurines are reported in some graves, rarely and usually in the burials of selected individuals. In certain settlements, children were buried near the center of the community, beside major structures, while adults were laid to rest farther out, in collective cemeteries. These patterns cannot be treated as universal. They vary from site to site. Still, esoteric readings enter here again. Were these figurines psychopomp-like companions guiding the deceased on their journey after death? Or emissaries of reptilian deities, rulers of the underworld gates? Mainstream archaeology explains the placement of child burials near sacred structures as indicators of social status or ritual differentiation. Conspiracy theorists, however, propose a darker possibility, that this marked a genetically chosen lineage, and that the figurines served as symbolic keys guiding the child's soul to the realm of ancient ancestors. Nothing is proven, but such interpretations keep the field of possibility wide open. The lines and patterns carved into the figurines' naked bodies should not be overlooked either. Researchers interpret them as tattoos or ritual scarifications. Naturally, soft tissues haven't survived, but evidence of lip ornaments and ear piercings appears in jawbones and teeth, showing that adornment was tied not only to aesthetics, but to identity and belonging. Esoteric thinkers take it one step further. The markings were not mere decorations. They were signs of power, allegiance, and spiritual transformation. The lines etched onto the figurines' bodies may not be random at all, but a coded language marking rank, role, or secret affiliation. They stand like visible seals, yet conceal a cipher that only those with the key could decipher. This art, they suggest, was the stamp of an ancient power, a mark of protection and belonging, an invisible boundary between the ordinary and the chosen. In some assemblages, male and female figurines appear in near equal numbers, but the focus isn't on sexual traits. It's on the elongated heads and the body markings. This suggests that the figurines might not depict individuals, but rather a collective, a brotherhood, or a closed order. Conspiracy theorists push the boundary further still. These markings, they claim, are the insignia of an esoteric cult, one that set itself apart from humanity and carried the knowledge of the ancestors. The serpent motif is not unique to Mesopotamia. Across world mythologies, snake and reptilian figures appear again and again. In Hopi traditions, there are stories of serpent people living underground. In the Maya and Aztec worlds, feathered serpent gods are said to have brought knowledge and order to humankind. In India, the Nagas are described as wise, semi-divine beings, half human, half serpent. Japanese folklore speaks of reptilian-like creatures such as the kappa. None of this proves that these cultures were in direct contact, yet the recurrence of such similar themes across distant lands remains a striking parallel. Whether these parallels represent a shared trace of a universal legacy or simply the human mind's common responses to the same fears and hopes is impossible to determine. Still, the Ubaid figurines seem to form the Mesopotamian link in this global chain of reptilian symbolism. The connection drawn to the Sumerian Anunnaki takes the discussion into even murkier waters. In some texts, the Anunnaki are described as divine laborers, lower gods who work beneath the earth, building structures and serving higher deities. In modern interpretations, some have been associated with reptilian traits, though such ideas are not accepted in mainstream scholarship. Conspiracy theorists, however, claim that the Ubaid figurines depict the Anunnaki, or perhaps their hybrid descendants, on Earth. According to this view, these teacher beings passed on agriculture, architecture, and social order to humanity. This claim survives not through evidence, but through the power of narrative. It lacks scientific certainty, yet it continues to spark curiosity, and perhaps that's why it endures. There is, of course, a more grounded alternative: shamanic representation. Mesopotamia has a long iconographic tradition of human-animal hybrid figures. In shamanic practice, the use of animal forms, masks, or costumes to cross into the spirit realm is a recurring theme. Perhaps the reptilian aesthetic symbolized a shaman's moment of transformation into a spiritual intermediary, one who heals, foresees, and communicates with the unseen. From this perspective, the figurines embody metamorphosis itself. Claims of shape-shifting nobles or non-organic intelligence may stretch the story into speculative territory, but the real evidence, what stone and clay quietly tell us, remains our most reliable guide. The Ubaid people's connection with the sea is also fascinating. A ceramic disc found at the H3 site in Kuwait shows an image of a two-masted boat, an important clue for early sailing practices. Describing it as one of the oldest known depictions of a sailing vessel may be the more cautious phrasing, but it still suggests that by the 6th millennium BCE, humans were not only cultivating the land, but possibly navigating the seas. The presence of Ubaid pottery all along the Persian Gulf implies mobility across both land and maritime routes. What might this seafaring connection tell us about the figurines? Some researchers have suggested that certain facial features and slanted eyes could coincidentally resemble those of distant seafaring peoples. Establishing a direct migration route is difficult. Such parallels are better kept at the level of resemblance rather than proof. Esoteric interpretations, however, open another door. Perhaps these visitors were not mere traders, but ancient travelers, bearers of knowledge and forbidden technologies. The black, helmet-like elements seen on some figurines might evoke bitumen-made headpieces or wigs, though this remains only an impression, not a verified conclusion. The Sumerians' own description of themselves as the black-headed people appears in their texts as a form of self-reference. Scholars interpret this phrase as relating either to hair color or to symbolic identity, rather than to a literal head covering. Linking it directly to black helmets would be speculative, but the emphasis on the head clearly held cultural and symbolic weight. Were the ancestors truly black-headed travelers? That's the kind of question the esoteric tradition loves to ask, while science, as always, replies with the simplest answer: no evidence. In some of the figurines, crown and scepter-like details can also be seen. Not all, but a few seem to depict accessories symbolizing authority. This strengthens the idea that the figurines represented a certain class, a community of priests, or an authority that spoke on behalf of the gods. From here we reach one of history's great turning points, the God-King system, a model where power was legitimized through divinity, a system that would later reach its height in Sumer. The Ubaid figurines can be read as an early, perhaps darker prototype of that model, yet it's safer to treat this not as a thesis, but as a cautious possibility. At Bahra 1 in Kuwait, clay analysis of a lizard-headed figurine suggested that the material may have originated from deep within Mesopotamia. Such findings indicate that cultural exchange was not purely economic, but also symbolic. Pottery and small sculptures were sometimes more than mere objects. They carried identity, faith, and authority. In this sense, they functioned as ideological stamps. That's why the line between peaceful diffusion and display of dominance sometimes blurs. Figurines may have served as tools to project social and spiritual influence over neighboring groups. But proving that is no easy task. We may never find a written statement that says, "We came, our order now prevails," yet the language of objects often speaks louder than words. The Ubaid phase fades toward the end of the 4th millennium BCE, giving way to the Uruk period, the great explosion of urban life. Massive temples rise at the hearts of cities. Irrigation canals become the arteries of civilization. The foundations for all of this had already been laid. Agricultural productivity, storage systems, organized labor, and spatial planning. The Sumerians did not directly copy the Ubaid's reptilian aesthetic, but the serpent's wisdom lived on quietly within their myths. The esoteric view says, the Ubaid's teachings were hidden, transformed, and camouflaged within the Sumerian pantheon. Science says continuity and adaptation. Sometimes both are looking at the same landscape. One sees through mist, the other tries to clear it. And then comes the famous question, the Sumerian Problem. How did this civilization achieve such complex governance, writing, measurement, and engineering in what seems like a relatively short time? Sudden might be too strong a word scientifically, but the acceleration of complexity is undeniable. Their language appears isolated, their origins disputed. Mainstream explanations abound. Population density, climate dynamics, trade networks, technological accumulation, and competition. The esoteric version offers a simpler answer. It wasn't an invasion nor a migration, it was a transformation. The Ubaid's hybrid lineage lived on within the elites of Uruk, and later Sumer. The priest kings carried within their blood the knowledge of reptilian ancestors. That's the occult version of the story. It has no proof, but it carries narrative tension. The truth is this: the Ubaid figurines are like tiny frozen scenes sculpted in clay. When you hold one in your hand, after thousands of years underground, it whispers that the beginning was more than just about farming and bricks. The elongated heads, almond eyes, and carved markings remind us of an age where identity was shaped on the body itself, where fertility and lineage were treated as sacred mysteries. So what were these figurines? Silent witnesses to a time when beings from the sky, or perhaps from the dark below, shaped humanity, or faint traces of a long-forgotten clan, a closed cult, or a vanished community? There is no definitive answer, but perhaps that's the point. They give us the courage to ask. Maybe the oldest legacy of civilization isn't the temples we built or the tablets we inscribed, but curiosity itself. What do you think? Are these reptilian-styled figurines unearthed from Mesopotamian soil simply fascinating works of art? Or are they the silent evidence of a genetic intervention, an unspoken shadow buried deep in human history? Share your thoughts, because truth doesn't belong to one person. Truth lives in the questions we ask together. And in the search, we continue side by side. If you enjoy mysteries like this, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications. See you in the next mystery.